Hello, so we're back to chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6 this time. So the scholarship in chapter 5 is an article by a man named John Winkler. Now, Winkler, the way the article is written, he was at a conference and a colleague was presenting a paper on the Athena, the festival in honor of Adonis. Now, Adonis is one of Aphrodite's lovers. He is immortal and he is killed while hunting. He's basically sort of a dying and rising figure. So he dies, but then comes back with the spring is sort of the idea. And at the Athena, one of the things that one of the features was that women would plant seeds. They would then water the seeds. These particular seeds would spring up. They were like weeds. They would spring up very quickly, but then they would then die very quickly as well. And so that seems to represent Adonis, who is a mortal man who died young, but also the male sexual excitation, that it rises and then it's done. The key question that Winkler asks is, why are the women laughing? So the Athena was sort of a very festive occasion. So some festivals are fairly serious. This was a more comic one. And Winkler's point in this article is that sometimes myth doesn't endorse or reinforce social conventions, but rather challenges them in some way. Now, my reading of that would be that this is actually sort of a safety valve thing. Women can pride themselves on the fact that they have more staying power than men, but men still have the political power. So it doesn't actually change anything at the end of the day. It may provide some solace to women in a patriarchal society. So the Near Eastern equivalent or thing for comparison is the descent of Ishtar to the underworld. The poem as we have it is an Akkadian version. So Akkadian became the language of Sumeria after a conquest, and Akkadian I think is a little bit easier to read than Sumerian, but there was a Sumerian original, so they were talking about Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, modern day Iraq, and the Akkadian version was probably composed sometime in the 800s BCE, so a little bit before Hesiod. But the original would have gone back quite a bit before that. So in this, Ishtar is traveling to the underworld. As she does so, she has to take off pieces of clothing as she goes down. So there are several gates she comes to, and at each gate she has to give something up. And that causes her to sort of lose her power. So she's sort of stuck there at the end. But her goal is to free her lover, Dumuzi, so this represents Aphrodite and Adonis in the Greek version. But the idea is to spring the lover. The bit about Cyprus here is that the Greek island of Cyprus, which is just off the coast of Phoenicia and is just south of modern-day Turkey, it's closer to Asia than it is to the Greek mainland, even though it is a Greek island. And so we have an intersection point in Cyprus of the Eastern gods, Ishtar and Inanna, which would be like Mesopotamian and Phoenician, Ashtart, which seems to be a Phoenician and Cypriot version of Aphrodite. There was a local goddess of sexuality on Cyprus called the Queen or the Paphian, and then Aphrodite gets laid over that. So, and remember, Cyprus is Aphrodite's home ground, and so that seems to suggest that she, maybe more so than some of the other Greek gods, really has this strong Asian influence from the fertility goddesses of the East. The Nachleben in chapter 5 is about movies. So the title of the chapter of this section is Pygmalion in Hollywood. And there are 4 movies that are briefly discussed: Pygmalion, My Fair Lady, Pretty Woman, and Lars and the Real Girl. So, on the Pygmalion story, Pygmalion was a sculptor on the island of Cyprus. The women of Cyprus somehow insulted Aphrodite. Aphrodite caused some, sexual craze to hit the island, so all the women became sort of sex fiends and they were having sex all over the place. Pygmalion is sort of a prudish guy, and he sees these women having sex everywhere, and he's totally disgusted by it. Well, he's sort of he feels he's disgusted by it, but he's sort of fascinated by it at the same time. He then tries to avoid looking at that, and then he decides to sculpt the perfect woman. So he sculpts the statue of this beautiful woman and then falls in love with. So he has his own sort of kink going on here. He falls in love with the statue. And he treats the statue as if it were a real woman. He lies it down in bed, he sleeps next to it, and so forth. And then there's a festival in honor of Aphrodite. Aphrodite eventually sort of relents, and there's a festival in her honor, and everyone's, partying like Mardi Gras. And Pygmalion goes to the festival, and while he's there, he prays to Aphrodite, and he hopes that he could have a real woman like his statue. And when he returns home, the statue has become a woman. So, this idea was picked up by George Bernard Shaw in a play he called Pygmalion. The main character of Shaw's play, Pygmalion, was a professor named Henry Higgins, who is a professor of languages. And he teaches Eliza Doolittle, who is a Cockney girl, how to speak like a lady and therefore be taken as a lady. Right? So he is the Svengali, or the sculptor, sculpting Eliza. And that same idea then, of course, is repeated in My Fair Lady, which is just Pygmalion as a musical. And then the same idea, it comes up in a way in the movie Pretty Woman, where Julia Roberts plays a prostitute that is hired by Richard Gere to basically be his escort, to be sort of eye candy when he's doing these business deals. But of course, they fall in love. And initially, right, she has to be sort of trained on the etiquette of being a lady. And that's somewhat similar. Lars and the Real Girl sort of flips things. Lars is a young man who was hurt in love, and he retreats and orders one of these blow-up dolls, which he then treats as his companion, and he brings this blow-up doll to wherever he goes. So if he's going bowling, he brings her along and then sits next to everyone likes Lars in this town, this small town, and so they play along and sort of treat Bianca, the blow-up doll, as if she were real. But Lars, in a sense, is the one who has to come out of his shell, and he doesn't sculpt Bianca into anything, but eventually he finds a woman that he actually is interested in, and then Bianca, the blow-up doll, has to then die of some mysterious disease so she can be out of the way, which is sort of what happens. Spoiler alert. For these things, if you want, you can feel free to watch any of those movies and then write, a short, like a 2-page sort of review consideration of this rendition of the story of Pygmalion. All of them are available on DVD. They're easily found in the library. They're all good. I mean, the movies are all good movies. They're worth watching. So, anyway, that's something to consider for extra credit down the road. Now, chapter 6 is about Athena, and it says Athena and Poseidon, but Poseidon gets short shrift, as does Hera does in chapter 3, and other gods do in other chapters. the one point where Poseidon gets some emphasis is in the story of the contest for Athens. So according to the story, both Athena and Poseidon wanted to be the patron god of Athens. They put it up to the Athenians. The Athenians voted, and Athena won. Now, a couple things. First of all, they each had to produce a gift. Athena produced the olive tree, and the olive, of course, was central to the Greek economy. It was like their number one import, that and wine. So it was a big deal, right? The olive, you don't need as much moisture as you do for some other things. And so in a dry climate like Greece has, this was actually a cash crop. So it was a great thing for Greece. And it could be used for all sorts of things. They used it in place of soap. They would rub themselves down with olive oil and then scrape off the oil and the dirt from their skin, for instance. But they could cook with it. Of course, they can eat the olives. So Poseidon gives them water, but it's salt water, which isn't much use. I mean, you can't drink salt water, right? So in the story, the claim is made that the women outnumbered the men and that the women all voted for Athena, and that's why Athena won. And to placate Poseidon in the story, the Athenians then take the right to vote away from women. So Athenian women did not have much in the way of legal rights. They did not have the right to vote. They weren't part of assemblies. They didn't serve on juries, any of that stuff. They may not have even gone to the theater. That's unclear. Now, that story was developed at a point, I think, when Athens was looking at democracy. So Athens becomes a democracy in 508 BCE, because voting only makes sense in a democracy. It does not make a whole lot of sense in a monarchy, where you have an absolute monarch. The only people who really count are the king's advisors, and that's only if he listens to the king, to the advisors. So, I think this is a late story. It's used to explain the fact that in Athenian democracy, women didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have the right to participate, right? If it's going to be ruled by the people, then it's only going to be the male people. And this is sort of an explanation or a justification for that. So they're sort of backloading stuff to justify current practice. And then the literature in chapter 6 at the beginning is the trial scene from a play by Aeschylus called the Humanities. Now, it says at the bottom, cut a little short. So, set up for the Humanities. The Humanities is the third play in the only trilogy which survives. Remember, the tragedians had to produce 4 plays, 3 tragedies, and a satyr play for the festival. Aeschylus seems to have preferred his 3 tragedies as being one story arc, so a trilogy. And the only one that survives is the Oresteia, which starts with the Agamemnon. Agamemnon comes home from Troy, gets killed by his wife. That's the first part. The reason he gets killed by his wife is he had sacrificed their daughter to get winds to go to Troy 10 years before, but also the history of Agamemnon's household going back, his father and his grandfather and so forth, they were engaged in all sorts of bloody practices. So this is a family that's had a lot of killing and incest and everything else going on. So it's a troubled family to begin with. Agamemnon gets killed. In the second play, the libation bearers, Orestes, Agamemnon's son, who was away when his father was killed, he was probably about 10. 10 years later, he comes to Mycenae. He's not recognized because, of course, he's been away and presumably picked up an accent from where he was, so they don't recognize him as a local. And he engineers the killing of his mother, who killed his dad, and her lover, who participated in that killing. And it ends with the killing of them, and with Orestes then driven mad by the Furies, who are spirits of blood vengeance. They inspired Clytemnestra to kill Agamemnon, and now that there is no one to avenge Clytemnestra when Orestes kills her, they do it themselves, coming sort of as ghosts, and they basically scare the bejesus out of him, and he runs off stage. Third play opens. He's in Delphi. Apollo tells him to go to Athens, where he will be tried for murder. And what we have is the trial scene. On the prosecution side are the Furies, and all they're interested in is this is a blood crime. He killed his mom. Blood crime. They're not interested in anything else. They're not interested whether she was justified in killing Agamemnon. Agamemnon is not a blood relative to Clytemnestra, so they don't care about that. He killed a blood relative. He's got to pay for that. The defense is covered by Apollo, and his star witness is Athena. And Athena makes the argument that he was avenging his dad. The dad is more important as a parent than the mom. Therefore, he was justified in doing that. It goes to the jury. The jury is tied. But Athena has the right then to cast the tie break, and she always votes for the defense. And so Orestes is acquitted. Now, Maurizio ends it right there. Like, oh, hooray, I won. The problem is the Furies have threatened to basically destroy the city of Athens if the jury does not find for them. For about 100 more lines, Athena basically gives a speech to the Furies where she convinces them to give up blood vengeance and back the Athenian system of trial by jury, of justice, of civic justice, and become defenders of Athens rather than these demonic forces that chase after people. They will then change their name from the Furies to the Humanities, the kindly ones, and they will be Athenian defenders. And she convinces them. So that's like a key thing, and especially if you're looking at Athena as a hero, what she does is she saves Athens through rhetoric and by making a deal with the Furies, and it saves the city. So it's the key point isn't that Orestes won. The key point is now we have trial by jury as a practice, and Athens, is sort of the founder of this, the way the play works. So I'm glad that the excerpt is in there. I think that Maurizio could have added another page and a half or 2 pages and got the full picture. I'm not sure why she cut it where she did. So those are my points for chapter 5 and chapter 6.